of the ad hoc committee that has been asked to make some recommendations to the commission about how we handle MOAs. And believe it or not, I went back and read all the minutes.
Good for you.
Whew.
I'm sure that was fun.
And what I came up with, and anyone can add to this list, that the things of interest were, among others, the issue of an escrow account, which relates to the tremendous amount of time it takes to do an MOA at the staff level. I think that the commissioners in particular are really concerned that this not be a committee decision, that the motion to move ahead with an MOA should be at the commission level and not at the P&I, which is pretty much where it is now. There's also an issue about who's qualified to have an MOA. There's another issue about the nature of a deviation. And in this case, remember, we are not talking about streamlining MOAs or any other kind of MOAs. We are talking about deviation MOAs. Ones that allow a public agency to have a memorandum of agreement despite the fact that they have a problem in the regulations in the plan. As I said, the qualification of the applicant is an issue. The public need is an issue. And the issue of, in some cases, whether it should be a waiver or whether it should be a deviation MOA. Those were the things that kind of popped out at me when I managed to read all the minutes. So I thought that what we could do today was have some discussion, among other things, about the role of staff versus the role of the commission. Because that's an important break point as far as I'm concerned. We shouldn't have a staff that has to spend hours and hours and hours doing an applicant's work. And especially in these days when our staff is overworked to start with, but also underpaid. So it seemed to me that one of the things I'd like to discuss today would be the issue of how do we reduce the staff time involved in preparing an MOA. Let's assume that we have decided who's qualified to apply and who's that the deviation is one that deserves an MOA. The question in my mind is that no MOA should be prepared by our staff. If the applicant needs to prepare the MOA and all the arguments that go for and against and the rest. So we had some suggestions from people, and I would like to hear again. One of the things on our procedures, if you keep the process in front of you, we'll be able to do this a little more efficiently. The first thing that happens now is the public agency. I get I guess the issue that's bothering me the most is making sure that you don't even start down this path unless it's one that is appropriate to start with. That the applicant is qualified, that the deviation is such that it can be handled, that the public good is served by having a deviation. Those are the issues that seems to me come up first. And then after that, all the rest of the performance takes place. So let me pose the question. How far are we willing to go with a deviation? Let's assume that we won't use BPU, some other public agency comes to us and says, we want to develop a road, and we have discerned that it would not comply with CMP. Then what are the next questions? Okay, guys, what are the next questions?
Well, if somebody comes into us and wants to build a road and it doesn't comply with the CMP, if somebody were to come into us with a project that doesn't comply with the CMP, we would see if there were other ways they could do the project that would. That's what we do. So if they're coming in with a road and it goes, I don't know why it doesn't comply, and we might say, we would say, well, if you do it over here, it does comply, why don't you do that? Does that meet your need? That's what we do first, see if there's any other way to do it.
So that becomes the first jumping off place, is whether the deviation is appropriate or necessary. But how about the question of whether the person asking, the organization asking for it, is qualified or not under the plan?
Qualified for what?
Qualified to even ask for an MOA.
So that the MOA...
Why aren't they coming in for a waiver, or why aren't they coming in for something else?
All right, that's a different question.
One of the things we tried to do when we were revising the process in this first step was to make that a little clearer. I mean, normally what happens, we don't get a call from someone saying, I want an MOA.
Right.
They call and say, we have a project, we want to come meet with you. As part of the normal project review, pre-application context. They want to come in and show Chuck and his staff, I don't know where he went, their application, that this is what they want to do. And that's where it starts. And then it's through that initial meeting where Chuck and whoever else is at the meeting can say, we think you're going to have some problems there. You're doing something that's not consistent because of wetlands or because it's not a permitted use. That's the initial step, and that wasn't really clear in the process to begin with. Right. It's not that initial, can we have an MOA phone call? That's not how this works. It's, here's our project, what do you think? And we'll tell them, usually, if it's an obvious deviation, we can tell them right then. And as Nancy said, we would say, if you just moved it over here on this part of your property, it would probably work. Or we would discuss, if it's a public agency, the possibility of a waiver. And we'd probably try to tell them all the different things they have to do to qualify for a waiver. The MOA discussion comes sort of at the end as like the last resort.
No, I understand that.
Okay, and we rewrote step 1 to try to say that now in the revised process.
It seemed to me in the plan, there isn't a really good definition of a public agency. In other words, the whole issue that particularly the public brought up with other people about the question of whether it has to be somebody who actually builds the road, or whether it's somebody who may just give the permit for the road. That's been an issue, it seems to me, for a long time, and the question, and we should resolve that. I don't know how to resolve it, but.
Well, there is a definition for public agency in the CMP, and maybe it's not clear enough.
I look, but
there is. There is. It's says it means the government of the United States, the state of New Jersey, or any other state, their political subdivisions, agencies, or intermediaries, and interstate and regional agencies that have sovereign powers of government. So there's a definition. Maybe that's not specific enough for dealing with MOAs, but there's a
But that
beginning.
is the
There is one, and there's the beginnings of a definition there.
I don't think the issue is the question of what the definition of government agency is. I mean, we know BPU is a government agency. The question is, on the MOAs, is that an appropriate agency to do an MOA for a given project? And it's the relationship, it seems to be between the project and the agency, not what the definition of the agency is. I think that's what we're troubled by. I'm not sure how to answer it either, but I don't think it's the definition of an agency.
Anyone else want to?
Well, I'll agree with Commissioner with the characterization of it. I mean, that was precisely my issue, the last MOA we dealt with, and I couldn't see the correlation. I thought that was we were using the inappropriate applicant.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think in the past we talked about how difficult it is to define everything and have everything laid out because there's always going to be an exception. So I would suggest that it should be part of the process. So if you look at the revised process in step 2 or 3, maybe and into 4, the staff and the policy and implementation committee need to include in their decision as to whether the MOA is the right tool, whether the applicant is qualified at that point for that particular application. And if there's a consensus that, yeah, okay, this is an option we want to at least go the next step on, then that decision would be made in that part of the process for each potential MOA applicant.
So it seems to me, I think you're right, and it seems to me that one of the things as we go through all of this is the commission wants to make those decisions, not the committee. And that came through very clear because as Commissioner Avery said, the committee is not a whole commission. It doesn't represent all the same people. And so therefore, I think in general, what we're trying to do is have the commission make those decisions.
Right, and we redrafted the process to do that.
Right,
Yeah,
and so
so-
part of that decision is, does the commission feel that it's an appropriate
Yes.
vehicle? Or, should you be entering into consider an agreement with whomever the applicant is? That's part of the
Well, the
decision that the
second part of
commission
that
would make.
is, it seems to me, is that argument shouldn't have to be a staff argument. That should be the applicant's argument. And I think that's one of the questions that keep coming up, is the question of trying not to have our staff basically doing all the homework involved with an MOA instead of the applicant. So it seems to me that there may be a way for the applicant to, in effect, prepare something. I mean, that we tell them what to prepare.
Right.
That could come to the commission and decide these issues of, are you qualified? Is it an appropriate deviation? Is there a public interest? And so on, at the commission level, before we involve our staff up to the ears in doing staff work. When it's time to prepare an MOA, then you really do need the staff, and that's a different step, seems to me.
So Candy, that's what we tried to do and make clear in the revised process.
Yeah.
There's these initial meetings. If the applicant decides they want to pursue an MOA, then it's their obligation.
Hang on a minute, Susan, has everybody got a copy in front of them?
If not, it's on the board, so. It's on the board too, if somebody.
Well, I can't read it.
Yeah, me neither. So there would be these initial meetings, and then if the applicant decided they wanted to pursue an MOA, it's then their obligation to submit all of this information that's in step 3. I mean, that's always been the case in the process. This isn't new. And that would be talking about the public need. They have to discuss that and present information about that. They are supposed to look at alternatives. They're supposed to talk about offsetting measures, all those things. That's on the applicant to provide. And once we have all of that, then they come to the P&I committee to make their pitch about why they want and feel that an MOA is appropriate. So that's not really the staff. That's mostly the applicant putting together this package of information, maybe the staff asking some questions to make sure we have everything, and then they're coming to the committee to make their initial presentation about the agreement. And under the revised process, that would then go on to the full commission for a decision. Before the staff isn't, drafting documents and doing detailed analysis at that point, under this
Then I
process.
think, Susan, one of the things, at least in my reading, that should be abundantly clear that it is the applicant that knows all of that. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, the problem we're having, I think, is not what the definition of a public entity is, but we're conflating the applicant and the public entity. In the last experience, the applicant was the BPU, but they weren't the ones that came before and submitted all the plans and were to be responsible for the work performed. What we should do is, the issue isn't whether or not it's a public entity, but if a public entity applies, then it should be the public entity that does the work, that is actually doing the project, that is coming before staff with all this information. The BPU never came before staff.
Yes, I did.
Well, it's,
Okay,
before
we should be
the-
talking about Connective as the example, if you want to go down this road, please.
Yeah.
Please, the Connective project is a better project for us to talk about.
Because it's over.
well, it's not a
Well, I
litigation,
mean,
so
litigation.
let's talk about one that's
So
not
Connective is
litigation.
the same set of facts, so we'll use that project.
Yeah.
Thank you, because Stacy's not here. and-
All I'm
Starting to-
all I'm trying to lobby for is that whatever entity the commission decides is an appropriate entity to apply for an MOA, be it a public entity, a private, whatever it is, it should be the entity that is responsible for doing the project. I'm not familiar with the Connective.
It was a similar set of facts.
Just call it a utility.
It was a
action, right?
utility
So-
project.
But the BPU was never responsible for doing the project. Utility X was responsible for doing the project. So whether we want to amend the CMP to even permit private entities to do a project is within the discretion of the commission, but whoever that applicant is, that applicant should be the responsible entity and not a shill, for want of a better word.
Okay.
But to your, if I may,
Go ahead.
to your point, I think that historically, and the language of the CMP is public agency. Got to be a public agency, and I read that strictly when given the opportunity. And I think your point is, if you're going to allow someone other than a public agency to pursue a deviation MOA with the commission, then the CMP would have to provide that. So you're right. You're
I
saying we have to do
absolutely
that.
agree.
Okay.
To have a public entity come in as, the only word I can think of is a shill for a utility, makes absolutely no sense at all. Either say the public entity has to be responsible, or only public entities that are responsible for completing the project can apply, which is what I think would be appropriate. But if you're going to permit, it makes no sense to me to permit a public entity to be the applicant when it is not responsible for the project. So that should be eliminated. I don't care whether you want to eliminate it by saying that only public entities that are going to do the project need apply, or whether you want to broaden it and say anybody can apply who's actually going to do the project is within the discretion of the commission. But to have one party be the applicant and somebody else doing the work is Alice in Wonderland as far as I'm concerned.
So
What they would argue is that they're completely at the disposal of the BPU. And, so I don't disagree with that, with your point of view. I just not sure how.
Can I just ask a question that Nancy and I are having the same confusion, I think. So getting away from utility projects, using a different example.
That's part of the trouble.
Right, so forgetting it's not a utility project, it's Ocean County, whom the commission did an MOA with many years ago, related to the landfill. Public agency came in, someone else was actually going to do the work.
Yeah.
The county came in and said, here's a property under our control, we need to enter into this agreement.
It was actually DEP.
DEP, and there were, right, so there were,
That was a private company, though.
there was a private company
Right.
doing the work.
Yes.
Does that, are you suggesting that that would be precluded? Or not, under what you
If Alan were
suggested?
here, he'd be arguing.
He would, well, I have his list of things I'm supposed to say, and that's one of them.
Okay.
If there is,
He couldn't be here, he wanted to
I'm
be
not
sure.
saying that the county couldn't enter into an agreement with a contractor to actually do the work.
Okay,
But it would be the county that would be responsible for that work that was performed.
But that's not the situation with Ocean County landfill, as I understand it.
No.
Yeah.
Because it was a private.
I didn't describe it terribly well, but it could, that is the type of thing that could happen, is you could get a township or a county coming in with a project they want to accomplish, and they hire someone else to do it, or turn the site over to this other entity to complete the work. I mean, that is conceivable.
But I think there's a difference in the situation where, one, the county owns the landfill and hires a contractor to do it.
Right.
That's something I might be more comfortable with.
Okay.
It's a harder question
Tough to get
for
at.
me, and I think for all of us, if the landfill is privately owned,
Mhm.
but the county wants to
Needs.
resolve an issue.
Right.
So they want to come to us and do an MOA to resolve that question. It's not different, I think, from the BPU example, or we get away from the
Right.
BPU example. So the question is, if a government agency, municipality or county, wants to come to us to resolve a local issue on a privately owned tract of land, how are we going to do it?
Right, and perhaps they have a role, they're funding it, or there's some connection. There's all these different, sort of slightly different permutations of,
Yeah.
The
And
county,
we need to-
the county's disposing of its waste at that landfill.
Right,
It's
so
using-
they-
relying on
yes.
that landfill to meet its obligations to deal with solid waste.
Well, maybe at the bottom of that issue is the question of the public good. And what are we doing for the public?
And Candy, that's exactly what happened with that closure of that landfill.
Yeah.
I mean, like Sue said, it was a private landfill, no hope of ever getting
Right.
closed because they were out of money. Okay, this firm comes along and says, hey, look, we've got a way to generate some money, which was bringing in additional material, which was in contradiction to the CMP. And by doing that, and DEP more or less fostering that, it got that portion of the landfill closed, and for the public good. Because otherwise,
It would
it
just-
would still be that way today.
But there was Ocean County as the responsible party.
Well, I think it was more DEP,
More like DEP.
Ocean County,
Yeah,
and
but
the
we didn't
private
sign an
company.
MOA with DEP, we signed an MOA with Ocean County.
think.
I think it was
Was it
both,
three-way?
maybe both,
Yeah, I think it was three
Yeah,
parties.
three parties.
But, I mean, this is a very thorny issue.
Well, it is, and it sort of shows you that each one of these agreements is gonna be a little different, you know?
But the way that the staff's drafted this now, it comes before the commission to be decided whether to move that along to that next step, where you really get involved in, the heavy work of doing the MOA. Whereas before, it was just the committee.
Yes.
Madam
But
Chair.
not only was it just the committee, the staff basically had a much bigger role in pushing the whole thing along. Right.
Yeah, I think that steps 1 through 5 in the process are the critical steps. And step 3 is really the place to develop the information. So perhaps an additional item in step 3 would be to ask for the roles and responsibilities of the respective partners in the MOA or in the project proposal at this point. So if there's going to be multiple parties involved, to spell out what their roles and responsibilities are. And then somewhere in 3 or 4, require a formal submittal that would almost be like a draft memorandum of agreement by the applicant. So not just to like for the applicant to gather his information and then come to a P&I meeting and make a verbal presentation, that there should be almost like a white paper where the commission members and the staff can read the proposal before it's presented to them, so that when the applicant finally comes in step 5 to make a proposal, it's not new information and it can be seriously vetted at that point in an efficient time.
Fred, that is what step 3 is designed to do, is, they're preparing a pretty detailed proposal, not just a map. They're writing down a lot and talking about alternatives and talking about offsetting measures. I like the idea of the role of the various partners and responsibility. I think that's important too. So, I mean, that is what would be under this process prepared by the applicant, not the formal agreement itself, because I don't know that you want anyone spending time drafting legal wording and all of that, but all the details, the substance of their proposal, and that would be what they would then come and present to the P&I committee. The applicant would present.
Who?
Oh.
Mark, I'm sorry.
Going back to the discussion we were having about Ocean County, I agree that there's certain roles. Government can't do everything by itself, and it typically does reach out to private entities to do things that it needs done. I think for the purposes of this, of deciding whether or not a project is appropriate for a deviation MOA, the very reason why the CMP says that it has to be a public agency that applies, in my mind, is that there has to be an underlying public purpose to the project. And I think we should be asking ourselves as a qualifier somewhere in here, step 1 or step 2, that how can the applicant define a purely public purpose of the project? Because that, I think, is what qualifies a good project. I can go along with the logic behind what happened with the Ocean County landfill and recognize that it was absolutely necessary to have a private enterprise partner to come in and do that. But clearly, it was driven by a public purpose to close the landfill.
Yeah, and Mark, Paul's got it up here on the screen. I mean, that's part of what the applicant is obligated to submit.
Yeah, okay.
Detailed description of the need of the project and the public purposes it'll serve.
Okay.
So,
Well, and it may be that we might want to address this list separately so that we can get all the words that does exactly what we're headed for. I agree. To me, the key is public benefit. What is the applicant doing that is different than what's allowed in the plan? And what is the benefit of that? And I think that's, to me anyway, as a commissioner, that is when I would make the decision of whether to tell the staff spend time, or the staff ignore this. We'll go make a recommendation to the applicant that they go for a waiver, for instance. Yes.
My understanding of why the commission started doing MOAs was because the waivers were so hard to get.
Yes.
So you also at that same time would have to answer the question of could they get the waiver?
Well, the question, as I
If we send them
remember,
down that path,
was trying to prove compelling public need was
very hard.
virtually impossible. And so it becomes a judgment decision at that point.
May I respond to that question? How can any of us ever determine in advance whether or not a waiver is possible? If it's up to 15 commissioners?
Sometimes you can't meet the tests.
Sometimes
There are very specific tests for the waiver, and sometimes it's very clear up front, you're not gonna meet them.
Yeah, but I mean.
Not all the time, but
It's the
sometimes you
only
can say to
thing
someone,
we
you're never
should-
gonna get this.
I just used it because it's the thing you should recommend to an applicant.
And we do, we sit them down and we say, you can go for a compelling public need waiver, these are the tests you have to meet. Chuck's not here, but he'll often send out a letter that explains how difficult it is to get the waiver and what you'll have to do to get it, because we discourage people often from going down that road on private applications or public, because it's just, they're not gonna get there.
Yeah,
And sometimes they just go away, most times,
I
they
mean,
go away.
that's simply the truth.
Right, well, that happens a lot, you just don't know that, it happens a lot.
So, but I think there's a threshold issue here that I don't think we're grappling with. I think there's a real danger in what we're creating through the MOA, or what we created years ago, the MOA, was a relief valve for the CMP. And I think we need to start with a preamble to this that says the CMP is there for a reason. It's there to protect the public good. We enforce it. And in very rare situations where very strict criteria are met, we will consider an MOA, because the danger of this is we're inviting private applicants to go to a governmental agency and say, listen, here's a way around the CMP, let's create an MOA and go to the commission. And I agree with you, it's hard to sit here and come up with rules. I mean, I might have a set of rules where I would say utility shouldn't be an applicant here or shouldn't through the BPU, but if we're not going to do that, and I suspect we might not, I think we need to say in the first instance that the CMP is there for a reason. We are here to enforce it. That one mechanism to get a deviation from the CMP, if you will, is a certificate of, is a finding of compelling public need. That this is another one, but it is, it should be a rare occasion and has high standards. That's one of the issues I think for me is, I think the standards need to be high. Do they need to be as high as compelling public need? I probably like them that high, but if they aren't that high, we need standards, because I think we don't have standards right now. To guide the commission, you know, when applicant X comes to us, well, what are the standards that we're going to apply? Say, okay, yeah, you get an MOA and you don't. I think we have the discretion to say yes or no to anything, but if we can, I think we should establish the bar as very high and as objectively concrete as we can.
And I'll just point out that on this process document that we have, I think this gets a little bit at what you're saying, the preamble talks about these things are rare. We don't take them lightly. And this is what we give to agencies when they come in and start talking about waivers and MOAs. We show them this process, and it makes it pretty clear that we expect you to meet our standards, and it's only rarely and under very limited circumstances that the commission will even consider a deviation. That's what the preamble does here. It tries to set that stage, at least in this document.
So it seems to me, among other things, the commission needs to say that. You know, which may involve a rule change, I don't know. But it seems to me that sometimes it looks to an applicant reading this, you might just think, well, I'll go to the staff and they say, go ahead, we'll go ahead. You know?
They might, but I think once they've met with us, they know that's not, that's how it's gonna go. I mean, it's honestly, you know, when we have these initial meetings, we don't mention the word MOA lightly. I mean, we make it very clear to them that these are rare. We don't do them often. Often we'll say them when we don't think it's something the commission's likely to look favorably upon. You know, we try to tell them.
But at that point, couldn't we have it so that the commission made that decision? In other words, they can come in, you know, you give them your spiel, and then they still decide they want to do it.
Right.
That they have to, through a process.
That's what this does. That's exactly what
Come
this
to the
process does.
commission.
Yeah, they come to the commission, yes.
So Candy, why is that a good thing? I mean, we're opening the commission up to, you know, an MOA a month. You know,
Oh,
I'm not saying it'll happen that way, but when you open that door to say you get to go to the commission,
But that's,
the people
but
are
that's
going to
what
try to
they
take
can
advantage of it.
But if they have to do all these things.
That's what they can do now. They can do that now if they want to. I mean, this process would have them coming to P&I, but they could certainly come to a commission meeting and make a
And do
pitch
the
in
same
public
thing.
session and do the same thing, so.
But they
this-
haven't, right?
We don't see
I don't
many,
know, you know, we don't see very many of these, first of all. It's rare that we even have a meeting about one, so I don't know if that's never happened, but it would be rare. I mean, the existing process would have that occurring, they come to P&I and do that. This is trying to say, there's that extra step of the commission itself has to hear and agree. Because we thought that's what you wanted. I didn't view that as opening the door to the commission, I view that as giving the commission the final
I'm
authority.
afraid I view it as opening the door. The question, I mean, you're right, it's rare now. I think it will become less rare with this policy.
So you would prefer that they simply come to the P&I committee?
But it's not, to me, it's not a question of P&I and the commission. It's a question of how open that door is to whatever, whether it's a committee or the commission. I don't think that's, to be honest with you, I'm not that concerned about
I
that.
don't see it as opening the door, I see it as getting, before significant amounts of work are done, now the commission gets to say yes or no, based on Candy's threshold questions.
I agree with that part. I
But I don't
think
think
we
it's
should,
gonna- I don't
before you
agree that
guys
it's gonna
engage
open the
yourselves
door.
in a lot of work.
And that's really
We
what
should
we were
evolve.
trying to do there was,
If you
they
read
submit
it,
information, they make a presentation, the commission decides, do we want to proceed or not? Not the
No,
staff.
I agree with that
Yeah.
conceptual approach, but I worry that the perception will also be opening doors.
Well, I think that,
the door's already open.
yeah.
Well,
Listen.
all I'm saying is I don't want to open it any
It's
wider.
what we typically say to people when they come in, sort of like, you know, I'm gonna tell my father, is like, say, listen, you're gonna have to take this to the commission. And that's usually, you know, what gets people to back off. So I don't think it's gonna open the door. I think it's actually gonna give us a little
We're
more.
gonna ask Donna, our project review person, who's the only one.
When the applicants come in, they want to get their project done. This is a much longer involved process for them. They are looking to get them done in the easiest way they can and follow our rules. I mean, to do this costs them a lot more money and a lot more time. Most of the public agencies have deadlines, or they have budgeted the amount for this year. They don't want to get involved in a process like this. This is like the very last resort at any time. I mean, most of them work with us and get their projects done in conformance with the plan. They're really not looking to do an MOA. An MOA is the hardest way to get something approved. I mean,
Maybe that's okay.
And that's good.
and that's good, I mean, but I can't see that this would be, people don't, I can't see public agencies wanting to do this. They've got budgets, they've got deadlines, they've got school projects have to be done in certain timeframes, and this adds so much time and expense for them. I really, it wouldn't be opening the door, I don't think.
But my feeling is that if an MOA costs time, money, and energy, it should.
And it
We
does.
agree. We agree. And we're not suggesting that that be changed. In fact, if anything, the revisions we're suggesting make the process longer and more difficult for the agency to get through. Because they're going directly now to P&I, and then they gotta take the step and go to the commission and have the commission itself debate and discuss and make a decision before we even begin to write a document, or before they even really get the staff's much feedback from us on all the information they've submitted. You know, this is just lengthening the process for them, and as Donna said, they already shy away from it because it is so lengthy.
Any other comments?
I have a couple of thoughts.
Okay.
I'm looking at that language in step 3, subsection 3, about public purposes. I like the fact that we're asking the applicant for a detailed description of the need for the project. I'm wondering whether or not we can go a step further, as Commissioner Lloyd was suggesting, and say something to the fact that they have to describe the public purpose that cannot be satisfied without deviation from the CMP. That's pretty strict, maybe too strict for the powers of those commissioners, but I throw it out there as a way to show that I'm very serious about making sure that the project have a public purpose. And then for item 10, we asked for a description of project alternatives that were considered and why they weren't pursued, suggesting that for whatever reason you give for what wasn't convenient for you, or it cost too much for you to do it that way, that might be an acceptable reason. And I would rather see it be tightened to say, give us a description of the project alternatives that reveals that there are no feasible alternatives that conform to the CMP. That's, again, very, very strict. Maybe too much so for the other commissioners, but I'd offer it out.
I think it's good. I think it's good. Yeah, the model for that is the Wetlands Act and the Wetlands Rules require, there's a presumption. There's a presumption that there's an alternative available that would be comply with the CMP, and maybe we should build that presumption in here. That the presumption is you can comply with the CMP and get your project purpose done. You could rebut that presumption with compelling evidence of why there is no alternative that could meet the project purpose and comply with the CMP. And then they can, I think that kind of concept would be helpful.
Anybody else?
Could somebody I'm really confused. Could somebody give me an example of a project that would meet the requirement of public interest so as to qualify for an MOA that would not meet the compelling public interest that would qualify them for a waiver of strict compliance? And if the answer to that is no, I fail to see why you need deviation MOAs at all.
Because the deviation MOA was supposed to give you broader latitude. They were created for projects, because projects came along that the then commission thought were good projects, but they couldn't meet the requirements of the compelling public need waiver.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Could somebody describe
A compelling
what that looks
public
like?
need waiver, besides showing there's a compelling public need, you have to show there's no feasible alternative in the Pinelands and no better alternative out, or I'm switching the words around. But you have to show there's no other way to do it. Is that the only significant difference? Was that the main test?
That's the main.
Yeah, that's what we do with
The
the
main
projects.
hurdle is the alternatives analysis that's required for a waiver.
But the MOA process also contains a hurdle, for want of a better word, of there's no better way to do this. Doesn't it?
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
The
The
process,
language Chairman Lowborough just said might get us there, but then
It's not.
but then you're making it like a waiver.
then we've just repeated the compelling public need waiver.
Right. We do ask as part of the process, as it's shown on here, are there alternatives and have you considered them? But it's not, if they say, yes, there are alternatives, it doesn't knock them out of the MOA process automatically. It's just a factor that we want the commissioners to be able to consider when they review it. If you were to ask that question in the context of a waiver, and the applicant said, yes, there are alternatives, we would say, then you don't qualify. It's an automatic no.
Why isn't that a good standard for the MOA then as well?
Because the MOA was created to get to projects that couldn't meet that standard.
Well, I understood.
Right,
I'm
I mean, I didn't
suggesting-
do
No,
that, but
I
that's,
understand. I'm not, you know,
right. So if you're gonna do with MOAs, then you put yourself in a position where a project may come before you that everybody thinks is the greatest thing ever, but for whatever reason, there's an alternative that they can't do, won't do, I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
and that's why. That's
But
why.
if that alternative.
But I wasn't part of I don't know what drove it.
Understood.
There must have been a project that drove it. I just don't know what it
Well,
was.
I'm not sure there was, I wasn't there either, so my sense from John
years ago was it was sort of a relief valve. I mean, so
Yes,
that,
exactly, exactly.
we wouldn't be saying no to projects that we thought were good. The danger of that, of course, is from a policy perspective, is when you create that little relief valve and you don't, it's hard to define
Right.
what that relief valve is. I understand
Yes.
no practical alternatives and a rebuttable presumption, but the next step is very vague.
Yes.
Can I just ask a question? The measure of the public good, does it have to be within the reserve or the Pinelands, or is it general?
Up to now, it's been general.
Undefined. That's not, it's not defined as part of the MOA process.
I mean, there's, and again, there's.
Or the waiver
The
process?
waiver talks about compelling public need, and it talks about, as Nancy mentioned, alternatives in the Pinelands or better alternatives outside the Pinelands, but it's a compelling public need. It's not, you have to prove that there's a benefit to the forest area or a benefit to the, that's not part of the waiver, that language.
But we might, go ahead.
It's like, when we did the Ocean County
The landfill.
landfill,
Yeah, that
it
benefits.
had to do with water pollution and everything. And it didn't need to be in the pines, but it could be in the reserve, could be everywhere.
We may want to try to define it as a benefit to the Pinelands in some fashion. I'm thinking an example that is a troubling one to me, at least, was the I don't know whether folks know about this, the LG proposal in the Palisades. They proposed a variance from the local zoning, it was a height variance. It was, I think it was a 35-foot limit. They wanted to build a 143-foot tower. It would impact the Palisades, but they argued, one of their arguments was the public benefit was they were going to be a LEED certified platinum building. I think there needs to be more of a nexus between the public benefit and the Pinelands, if you will. I mean, if somebody came in Pinelands and said, we want to build a building like LG, it's going to be LEED certified platinum, that's wonderful. But if it violates our standards, I'm not sure that's a reason to grant a variance.
Let me just, I can't use my microphone, but standards for the waiver, I want to make sure, because I don't, it gets a little confusing, but for a compelling public need waiver, you, the commission, would have to find that the proposed development is serving an essential health or safety need of the municipality. And, municipalities are in and out of the Pinelands, they're split. Or in the case of a county, it could be serving the needs of more than one municipality. Public benefits of the proposed use are of a character that overrides the importance of protection of the Pinelands. That's a pretty strong standard. The proposed use is required to serve existing needs of residents of the Pinelands. That's the larger Pinelands, not just the Pinelands area, but the Pinelands National Reserve. So again, you're talking about a pretty broad area. No feasible alternatives exist outside the Pinelands area to meet the need, and there are no better alternative in the Pinelands area. So standards for a waiver those are some pretty strong words. They're high bars to meet. You are talking about serving needs of residents of the Pinelands. You're talking about meeting an essential need of a municipality that's in the Pinelands. Pretty strong language. I mean, and those words don't exist in the MOA section.
I mean, that's in the waiver.
Those are waivers. That's a compelling public need waiver, which could be submitted by a public agency or it could come from a private entity as well.
Could somebody describe a project that would meet the deviation MOA that doesn't meet the waiver of strict compliance?
Any
Well,
MOA we've done, so
sure.
pick one.
Stafford Business Park. That was done closure of the Stafford landfill, and the commission authorized construction of residential and commercial development in Stafford Business Park through an MOA.
What disqualified that from a waiver of strict compliance? How would it have failed?
That would never have qualified for a waiver.
Say she knows. The deviation was due to the environmental standards they needed a deviation from environmental standards in order to close the landfill. I can't remember if it was wetlands or threatened and
Yeah, I think it
endangered
was threatened
plants.
endangered species.
Plants, animals, and the way they wanted to go about closing the landfill and then redeveloping, they probably had alternatives, and that would have knocked them out of the waiver process.
But then they came back to us for additional relief after.
They came back for an amendment to the MOA to construct a solar facility, correct? Right.
So it was threatened and endangered species was the problem?
It was one of the problems. I think there were other standards, but that was certainly
There was also, there were
an
acres
issue.
of development that they couldn't have had, and they were allowed under the MOA, the additional acres of development. In their view, to compensate for, I think it was like, the cost of closing the landfill.
Yeah, I mean, remember too, that Stafford Business Park's in a regional growth area, so you weren't dealing with quite the same issues. It wasn't in a forest area, for example, so the regional growth designation, gave them some ability for sewer, commercial, residential development anyway. So the deviations were due to the way they were closing the landfill and then redeveloping other portions of the site. I mean, that's the biggest one that sticks in my mind, but we could go back through any of the MOAs the commission's done, in the past 10 or 15 years and look at those.
Well,
I mean, I think that's might be interesting.
Usually it's the
The
alternative.
most pertinent are the
There's
ones
always-
we know. It's the one we just went through, the connective, Stafford, and Ocean County. I guess, are there other ones, other good examples? Those are the ones that I'm aware of, I guess.
I don't have that document.
well, there's never
We
been
can
a
show
very
you
good
the
Pull 'em up,
PowerPoint.
Paul.
But I don't know that we want to go through a whole other presentation, although I do have one, where we go through all of the deviation and the ways that the commission has approved.
Do you want that?
There was another one
presentation?
mentioned earlier this morning. This was an early one that was done where the commission entered into an agreement with DEP and the New Jersey Conservation Foundation to allow an off-road vehicle park in Woodland Township.
for a limited amount of time.
Right, so there were right, but that was a deviation in a way. It's a preservation area where normally that type of use wouldn't be allowed. And the commission went through the MOA process there and allowed the deviation, allowed the off-road vehicle park to be formed and to continue for a certain period of time. And there were restoration requirements and deed restriction requirements that went along with it. But that's the type of thing, had they applied for a waiver, they wouldn't even have gotten in the door because there's always going to be an alternative site where they could have done that, right? So,
And that was a relief valve to relieve impacts from ORVs throughout the country.
right, the thought was that if, a site was authorized, then legal riding would occur there and you'd reduce the amount of illegal riding activity. I mean, I think today we would say that probably could be shown that that did not work, but it was an agreement the commission entered into both with a public entity and also a nonprofit. It was a sort of a hybrid and, there was found to be the public need and the deviation was allowed and there were offsetting measures but it would never have qualified for a waiver. So the MOA the commission was willing to do that.
That was the case when the MOA really worked, in a sense, because it all took place the way it was supposed to. I'm
Well,
sorry,
by
I
that,
can't-
Commissioner, if by
Yeah,
that you
the
mean...
process, you mean the process that was followed?
That's
Yeah.
what I mean.
Yeah.
Oh, the process.
The process.
But interestingly
Right.
enough, I think the ultimate goal didn't work.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure she meant the process that was followed, yes. The ultimate, and as that happens sometimes, you get to the end of that agreement
It
and
doesn't quite,
perhaps you wouldn't do it again because you've learned something and,
yeah.
But what sounds right to me is, clearly the applicant was a public agency, there was a public purpose, there wasn't a way to make that work through waiver, so thus a reason to want to have MOA, but not to afford the MOA option to everyone, just to public agencies that have a public purpose. This is something the public needs. I think that's essential to this.
Well, so we can go on with having done something. I would like to ask all of you if you agree that we could move this whole discussion of MOAs to steps, whatever, to the commission rather than the committee. Does everyone agree that we should do that?
I just have a question, and that is, in this procedure, I don't see anything about equivalent protection. Am I missing something here?
no, it is there. It's one of the things that when the public agency submits its proposal, they have to talk about. That's the last item, number 11, under step 3. They have to talk about what are they proposing, what are the specific measures they're proposing as part of their equivalent level of protection. So they have to identify that in their proposal, make that part of their presentation to the P&I committee. So it's something you all can
Okay, I
see and
see.
discuss, and then.
And that would be sort of the bigger picture, and then as the process goes on, then you negotiate all the details, and we keep coming back with it, but they'd have to craft something up front.
Right, we do, I mean, that is something we emphasize to them, and it's just one of the many reasons, as Donna was saying, public agencies like to back away from the MOA because we tell them there's going to have to be some kind of significant offsetting measures to ensure equivalent protection, and that generally equates to dollars, and they're going to have to do something above and beyond what they originally planned, and it's not in their budget, and it's just one of the many factors that often discourages them from proceeding.
Well, and the question then becomes, how do you set standards for that equivalency? Because we have none.
That's right.
But if these things are to be few and far between, I see no reason to have them go before the P&I committee. I think the full commission should handle MOAs, and I think that would reduce the number of applications and give, before this huge amount of work that has to go into creating an MOA, go forward, they should have a sense of where the commission is and not a subcommittee of the commission.
I agree, and
I mean, that is what this
I think the other thing is that it's up to the applicant to sell their need for an MOA, not to our staff. That work needs to happen by the applicant who wants to do this, and they're gonna have to prove all those things.
The other concern with the equivalency is that it invites only, like, it takes down at a point, many are gonna walk away, municipalities who may not have the resources, but the deep pockets who have the resources are the ones who are gonna go forward, and that bothers me. Those deep pockets are utilities, those deep pockets are developers who say, I'll clean up a landfill for you, but here's the compensation I want for it. I'm not sure how to deal with that, but it's an issue.
Maybe that's a judgment call when we go to the commission.
Well, it is.
No, but I mean, maybe that's the only answer to that. The other things that I asked Susan if creating an escrow account required a rule change. She says no.
No. I mean, it is something that the CMP authorizes now, so if we're doing an MOA, the commission decides they want to do an MOA, and we need, we want to write into that agreement, or we want an escrow account.
I mean, we just never have done that.
We just don't always do it.
So we have the authority over development applications to do, does that extend to MOAs?
I think so.
I believe it says specifically that an escrow account, we can require that if we needed to, hire someone to review something about the agreement, or, for
We should be able to do it
Expertise.
to cover our own expenses.
Right, and so we often do write into the MOA that whoever the agreement is with, that they'll reimburse for staff time.
Who makes that judgment now? Does the staff make the judgment in the first instance, we want an escrow account for this application because we envision a lot of,
Who makes the decision when an application comes in on whether or not we're gonna hit up for escrow?
I would say ultimately the executive director, but the.
You do?
I'm sitting at my desk going, I think I need an escrow today.
The director of regulatory programs would make a determination that we need additional help and would recommend that to the executive.
Yeah, but isn't
But
that,
that's different. That's like if we're gonna hire, we're gonna consult with PE.
Or for excessive staff
Right,
costs. I think there's language. in
Sometimes
there.
you also do it that way for excess, if it's gonna be an inordinate amount of staff time.
I have to read the regulation,
Have you done, I mean,
It says we can request
not
an
for an
escrow.
application that I'm aware of.
We can request an escrow for applications or other matters, like an MOA, that involve complex issues, which, because of the need for specialized expertise, necessitate the retention of consultants, or will require considerable staff review. So it's,
who makes the decision, the executive director or
yes,
us?
the executive director.
ultimately. I would think everything falls.
But I mean, that, as part of an MOA, that would be, one of the things, when it would go to the commission, for the commission to decide whether you want to proceed with an MOA, that's one of the things the commission should decide, is, okay, we're gonna do this, and we need an escrow for this reason.
That's what I was trying to get at, was that basically when the commission decides to go forward, that's when they need to say, and that would be a recommendation from you, I can't review this unless, okay.
Should be doing that more.
Fred?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up what Arnold said, because I think that has pretty significant merit. If you look at step 7, which is the step that brings the proposed application to the full commission, there's no provision in here for the applicant to be there. I mean, maybe it's just assumed, but if in the event that the P&I committee didn't care too much for the application, and they were like, no, we don't like this, but there's an obligation to take it to the full commission to satisfy the applicant, then the applicant would need to be there to make his case. So maybe steps 4, 5, and 6 shouldn't even go to the policy committee as just I think right to the commission and deal with it one time instead of having 2 times.
I think that's what I was trying to get at. I think that we need to go to the commission with everything. If we pause on the way, there's a lot of things that can not only happen, but it takes a lot more staff time.
Right, and if it's a big deal, maybe it has to be a special meeting just for that.
Maybe so.
Well, I think the reason we left in here that we want the agency to come and make a presentation first to the P&I committee is to give the committee the opportunity to ask a lot of questions and say, you should really include this additional information in your proposal. We want to know the following 5 things. It's not like a one-time thing where they come and present and then off we go to the commission. The P&I committee will have the opportunity to ask questions and have a dialogue and say, we don't understand this part of your proposal, you need to clarify that. Or they may say, we don't like this at all. We think you should stop. And they might even not go to the commission after that, I don't know. But it really was to give the committee the opportunity to have a discussion and, ask for more information if they want. Sometimes it's hard to do that at a full commission meeting, so.
Yeah, but
We're trying to maintain the structure that the commission's always had, where it's the committee that does a lot of the preliminary.
To be honest, with my experience, even at the committee level, it's difficult to have that kind of
Yeah,
conversation because we're
I know.
public meetings, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you prefer that those steps be eliminated and it just go directly to the commission, you could certainly do that.
I think I'd prefer to give that committee an opportunity. I think we need that kind of detailed discussion.
I think it's important.
And I think it is I agree with Mark, it's hard enough to have it in the committee, but it's very hard to have it in the full commission.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we wanted to go to the commission, for sure.
And it will, under this.
That's what I mean. It
Yeah.
needs to go.
It will.
In other words, the decision-making will be made at the commission. Anything else?
I'd like to raise one point. Step 11, rather, is the step that addresses the final draft of the agreement. And that occurs after the public hearing. And I would like to see something here, possibly in step 11, that would say if the final draft doesn't reflect what was presented to the public for the public hearing, if there are going to be substantive changes to the final draft, then there should be some opportunity for public input to the final draft.
So, yeah.
Not necessarily another hearing, but
Well-
a period of time for comments.
So I tried to do that in step 10. I added a footnote where I talk about if substantive changes are made to the agreement after the hearing in response to public comment, then it may be necessary to have an additional hearing. And then that, of course, would delay the schedule. So that's where I tried to address that.
Then the key becomes what is substance.
Well, of course. I mean, this is the process now. We just haven't written that before, but, we know that if we're going to change the agreement in some significant fashion, just like if you change a rule that you proposed, after it's been proposed.
It's in your footnote. I
It's in the
missed- I missed
Yeah,
your
then you have
footnote,
to
sorry.
re-propose, you
Okay.
can't adopt with substantive changes, so it's similar to the rulemaking
Okay,
process.
that's fine. That's,
So
I
I-
appreciate
yeah,
that. That
okay.
takes care of my concern.
So in other words, you have a written document and a public hearing. And the written document gets changed, then you have another public hearing.
And an additional opportunity for public comment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? Well, based on all those wonderful words of wisdom, let's put this together again and see how it is, and we'll
Process.
circulate it to everybody. Because in the end, we have to recommend something to the commission.
Or to P&I to do more work on, because we still have this other list.
Right, the more substantive.
Of issues and suggestions that we were hoping to whittle down or prioritize and then go to P&I and work on them there.
Yeah.
Not that we don't enjoy having 2 meetings in a day, but
But as far as the process goes, Candy,
Is one long one better than two short ones?
yeah, it's a little less upfront work. So as far as the revised process goes, do you want this committee to meet again, or do you want me to just circulate it around and see if there's agreement? I don't know how you want to do it, but ultimately it should go
I
to
think
the
the thing to
commission.
do is to put together a document, and maybe you and I'll go over it, and I'll see what I heard today. And we'll circulate it. If someone wants to meet before we send it to the commission, tell me so, and we'll do that.
that's good.
If it's, looks okay to you guys as a recommendation to the, I guess, the meeting of the commission, or the commission as a whole, if it looks okay to you, we will go with that recommendation and see what happens.
And Candy, if we have comments, talk to Sue or you or who?
Send them to
An
me.
email circle.
Certainly with the whole committee, if we're comfortable with that, so that everybody
Yeah,
sees it.
if I get a lot
I'll
of,
sign off on them, we can go forward.
if I get a lot of comments, we'll have another meeting and discuss those comments. If we don't have a whole lot of comments, then we will go ahead and recommend it.
Will the document be on your website?
It's,
Sorry, I can't hear
It's
you.
there now.
Will it be on the website?
Yes.
Yes.
As it is
this
there now.
version is there now, yeah.
Well, it won't be on the website until we have all agreed to it. Because otherwise it gets,
Otherwise, there it is right there.
as soon as we circulate it and nobody comments, off we go.
Good.
You'll have a chance to see it before the commission takes any kind of
Yeah.
action.
So we're adjourned to the call of the chair? Is that where we are?
Is that all right?
May I request, Madam Chair, that when it does finally come to the commission, I don't know whether it be December, January, whenever you think it might be, that the committee members be specifically invited to that commission meeting,
Oh,
and maybe
absolutely.
recognized.
Absolutely. We'll give them a crown.
What, is that what we did? We give you a...
Thank you all. We'll just keep on working on it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Madam.
Oh,
Motion that
Candy,
we approve our minutes of the previous.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Public comment period.
Candy,
And
public
then public
comment?
comment.
Public comment.
Oh, sorry about that.
Do the minutes first.
I was absent the last meeting, and it doesn't show this.
Well, you can always
No,
vote on the
it's
minutes.
because if you're an alternate, we don't list you as being absent, because that would seem bad.
Will someone move the
I'll
minutes?
move the minutes.
We don't want
I'll
anyone to
second.
think badly of you. I'm sorry.
All those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye. Ernie's motion. I second.
Thank you. Opposed? Good God. Thank you. Thank you, Betsy. Those are very good minutes. Yeah, I'm going.
Oh,
I'm going there.
I'm sorry.
Public, got something to say?
Well, there's a list, I think you're on correspondence.
You're supposed to jump.
I probably could.
Lee Rosens at BPA and New Jersey. Jersey Audubon, is there an echo or something?
No.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. My first comment is, I hope an appropriate deviation. And that is to say that I was very interested in your discussion of a possible escrow account to recoup some of your expenses. And because for years I've been standing up here and proposing something similar so that you could create a fund for you to hire P&E experts to do T&E surveys as opposed to the applicant developer who has an obvious conflict of interest. And for years I was told it was too complicated to set up an escrow account. So I would like you to reconsider that. But to the point of the MOAs, I'm pleased to say that most of what I was going to say today has been said by you all. I had been concerned that there hadn't been enough discussion that I was aware of what is an appropriate deviation and how is that determined. And my only additional thought after your very, I thought, useful and thorough discussion is that, in my opinion, there ought to be something in the CMP language that says an applicant for an MOA has to provide, a public agency that is applying for an MOA has to provide you evidence that there is in fact, and if you don't want to use the word compelling, because that would be too much like a waiver requirement, a very important, serious public need to just have language that says you have to describe a public purpose seems to me much too mild. It would be almost automatic. Every time a public agency wants to break your rules, because that's what we're talking about, you could come in and say, well, no, the public needs something, and we, the agency, have decided that, and you would have no recourse to turn them down. And you would have, if when you get to the MOA process, it seems to me what you're doing is negotiating a price. You've almost decided that they can proceed, but here's what you have to do to make compensation, to try to compensate for the damage you're going to do to the ecosystem. So if a public agency wants an MOA which would give them permission to break your rules, it seems to be they should have to provide not only do more than just come in and say, yes, there's a public need. They should have to provide you really convincing evidence of the need and for the fact there's no feasible alternative. Not just come in and say, yes, there's a public need. I think you need evidence. I understand there's an argument that says, well, who knows best about the public need? You can say, well, the agency that's set up to serve that need. And I would actually believe that in a perfect world, but we all know that regulatory agencies are often captured by the industry they're supposed to regulate, or see their role more as advocates than regulators. And we've seen that municipalities confront for private developers here in order to get into the MOA process, avoid the waiver process. So I think it's important to have some language that says, if you want it on the basis of a public need, you have to really prove to us that there is a very important public need that must be served. And even the word override. I mean, why should you break your rules if there isn't a public need that overrides your need to preserve the Pinelands? So that doesn't sound so outrageous to me. And I realize we're getting to the point where essentially you have two almost identical processes. waiver in the MOA. But if an agency can't say our need to serve the public overrides your need to serve the public by preserving the pines, why would you let them break your rules? Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Blanche?
Not today.
Anyone else?
Bill will.
Okay, Bill.
Thanks. I want to talk about the substance, about the criteria and the decision rule and the regulations, which is the equivalent level of protection that we didn't get any focus or not sufficient amount of focus on with respect to the primary focus today being on process. I think what you're doing, I agree with Commissioner White's statements, that you need some kind of contextualized statement about this is unusual, rare, deviation is not what we'd like to see. But what you're doing is a mitigation approach, and I'm not a fan of mitigation, but even the DEP, who I disagree with on a lot of issues, has a technical manual for establishing equivalent ecological and water quality protection for disturbance of riparian buffers. That was adopted by Commissioner Jackson. It was upheld in the appellate division by a challenge by the Builders Association as a rule in the absence of promulgated rulemaking. It was upheld by the appellate division. So there's a legal decision out there that explains its technical rationale. It's a good technical document in and of itself. It's limited to the ecological attributes of a riparian corridor and heavily focused on water quality. But you folks have the staff that can do Pines resource equivalents, and your burden under the CMP is to protect the pinelands. You don't want to let an applicant frame that conversation. You want to have that defined by your staff as to what constitutes an equivalent level of protection. The second point is that you're really handcuffed without going in and opening up the standard. I don't think the standard should be equivalent level of protection. If you look at the mitigation formulas that the DEP has in the wetlands program and the wetlands mitigation program, if you look at what they just recently proposed in the riparian, they proposed a whole scheme to allow disturbance of riparian corridors, and they proposed a mitigation offset to allow that disturbance. And there are mitigation ratios that go from 2 to 1 to 10 to 1. That's way more than equivalent level of protection, because you're giving a blessing to destroy a resource forever in one specific location that's permanent. So you want to extract some offsetting thing that through time will offset that disturbance and degradation that the disturbance causes. So you need to reopen this conversation. I started at the beginning when the committee was formed to say you're going to have to look at rule change. And you can't get this through a policy and procedure that guides the commission and the applicant. You have to bite off the substantive standard. And I think your attorneys will tell you, if you're going to deal with a substantive standard, it has to be promulgated through rules. The substantive standard you're now handcuffed on is not just, public project, public applicant, public agency, but your substantive decision standard is equivalent level protection. You're going to have to bite that bullet. And I would urge that it be, at a minimum, equivalent protection or offsets in the following ratios for the following types of permissive deviations. And some deviations are going to be minor. And this is the Utility X, who argues, we're going under roads, we're not cutting down any trees. And I've read that comment from your staff in the paper, and it's really gotten my gut. But if in fact that were true, if you had a right-of-way disturbance that merely disturbed pavement, no environmental disturbance whatsoever, then yeah, conceptually you might want to say equivalent level protection. But if you're going into a forest area, you're going to have species impacts. This ocean landfill thing I was unaware of. I mean, that's a big deal. And you got to have that parameter and framework defined up front. And it's not that hard to do. For God's sake, you could take the DP's work, which I would, oh man, I can't believe I'm saying it. But your staff are obviously much more qualified to do that kind of work, and don't rely on the applicant to do it. And in closing, there needs to be a concept, and this emerged in your discussion about the ocean landfill situation. And there are two issues there. One is that it's not just a public entity and a public-private project. It's that the benefit is, if you allocated the benefit of that project, and Ernie, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding was that they didn't comply with the closure requirements. So you understand what this means, is that as a landfill owner, as a private landfill owner, he's not out there to provide a charity service. He's a business, he's making a profit. The DEP regulations and the BPU regulations required, as part of the tipping fee, a set aside of an escrow account to pay for closure. And he had to have a closure plan, and the closure plan had to be financed. And this is all prescribed by the DEP regulations at NJAC 7:26, subchapter 2A, I think is the closure requirements. I used to work in that program. So the point is, in this case, the applicant, the landfill owner, was either pocketing that money or he, went down to Florida with it. And he should not be rewarded for years of non-compliance with regulatory closure requirements by cutting a deal with the Pinelands Commission and the DEP to allow him to accept new waste to generate a cash flow to pay for that closure. That's what happened here, I think. And that's DEP's policy. That's what they've done, because for years they haven't enforced the closure regulations. So now they've let people steal the closure escrow account funds, and there's no money there. So you shouldn't be dragged into rewarding the profitability of a private corporation. And the second part of that test, that's public-private, and the allocation of the benefits between the public interest and the public benefit versus the private benefit. Because if you have these schemes where they say, well, we'll clean up a landfill if you give us a corporate office park, that kind of thing. But there's another feature of that, and it deals with, in an enforcement context, they call them supplemental environmental projects. And what the concept there is, you're going above and beyond the regulatory requirement. So the regulatory requirement establishes a floor, and you go above it. This concept needs to be built into your approach, where you would only get a MOA, and again, this is beyond equivalent protection, but you couldn't get a MOA for things that are regulatory mandates. You see what I mean? You might be able to bend the commission's CMP, but you shouldn't be able to bend like water quality standards or landfill closure requirements or T&E regulations or the Clean Water Act. There's a whole suite of things you shouldn't be able to bend through the MOA process. So they need to be constraints. So you need to look at the regulatory compliance thing. And if you want to find where you can get that, and tell your staff, look in the supplemental environmental projects enforcement initiatives of both the EPA and the DEP. Candy, with all due respect, I think I bring a level of expertise here on regulatory affairs that is a benefit to the public and a benefit to the commission. And I don't think that there should be the kind of reception I'm getting right now, frankly. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, is there a motion for this?
Move it. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks to the staff.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
See you.